All right.
So, again, good morning to everybody. And we are in chapter 2, and we're at the very last phrase, at the very last statement of Rabbi Yossi. So the Mishnah in my edition is 17. In other editions, it might be a different number. And he's already said, he said three things again and again and again. We have this tripartite structure for the teachings. So the first one is to treasure other people's property the way you do your own. The second was prepare yourself for learning Torah. And now the third one is B'chol ma'asecha yihiyu l'shem shamayim. Okay, so who's got our standard translation, our more usual translation? Sherilyn's got it. What is that one?
Let all your deeds be for heaven's sake.
Right. So which sounds a little, for the sake of heaven sounds a little more formal, right? But for heaven's sake, let all your deeds. Exactly. Well, right. So yeah, for the sake of heaven, right? So let all your deeds be for the sake of heaven. And do we have a different twist from the Shapiro translation?
It's basically the same. Do all you do for the sake of heaven.
Okay. Very good. So, of course, this requires unpacking. What are the things that we do, all the things that we do, and what does it mean to do them for the sake of heaven? What does that mean for the sake of heaven? So, any suggestions?
Well,
Yeah, Josie, I think you have to unmute. Now you're frozen. No, you're not frozen.
Note says, acting for the sake of heaven is acting for the good of the whole.
Okay, so that's Rabbi Shapiro's explanation, and he knows that there needs to be some kind of explanation. So he says it's for the sake of the whole. Does he capitalize the W?
no.
No.
Like, so, in line with many of the other comments that we've noticed he makes, for the sake of the whole, has a different connotation for me than for the sake of heaven, right?
Yep,
Just in
absolutely.
general, heaven can mean the sky, right? Look up at the stars in the heavens, right? So it has a very material meaning, the stuff that's up there in the sky. And then heaven, by association, has some spiritual meaning, right? Am I going to go to heaven when it's all over? By further extension and knowing what this means in rabbinic parlance, for the sake of heaven means for God's sake, for the sake of God. Heaven is one of the different ways that we refer to God. That's why I asked whether Rabbi Shapiro capitalized the word for the whole, right? Because you could sort of take the idea that God is the all-encompassing allness of everything. In the Zohar, the word all refers to God as well. But he didn't quite do that. So to me, that association that I have for what he says is a much more down to earth, actually unheavenly kind of concept. But then you could push back and say, the skies are part of the whole also, right? We're not going to be able to isolate what we do down here with the atmosphere, right? If we pollute the atmosphere, guess what? The rains will not come in their proper time according to the way they should be coming. So we're acutely, some of us are acutely aware of the problems of how the whole is impacted by every single, butterfly fluttering wing, and how much more so every unthinking, or thinking human action. So, so that the idea that it's, think about how everything is impacted by what you do. seems to be, I think, where he's going. But I mean, that's again, a kind of a secularized, modernized transposition of the statement. The simplest statement way of saying is, do whatever you do for the sake of God. Right? Yeah, Jen.
So I was thinking about this, and there's similar things like in the Gita and other places. But like, how does that affect you when you're sitting here? I'm sitting here doing a simple cross stitch while we're talking, and like, how is that like for the sake of heaven? Or how is like if I sit down and read a murder mystery or a manga, I'm having really trouble thinking like, is he saying don't do frivolous things, or somehow dedicate even that to God? I don't know where to go with that.
Right. No, that's a very key question, what you're bringing up. And this is, you're now bringing us back to the first part. All the things that you do, all the things that you, very inclusive, phrase. All the things that you do. Well, we do all kinds of things. So let's start. If we take the simple meaning of L'Shem Shamayim, for the sake of heaven, let's take the easiest stuff first. What things do we actually do, if any, explicitly knowing that we're doing it, supposedly even, for the sake of heaven? What things do we do for the sake of heaven? And then we'll see if we can expand it beyond that. Bill? Prayer. Okay, so prayer might be, understood by many people to be something where I want to talk to God. Now, of course, again, that's been certainly very secularized in our culture and in our environment and in our community. Prayer is getting into the deepest sense of yourself. Prayer is calming yourself down and reminding yourself of what's important. Many kinds of important lessons, but lessons that are actually geared to taking away that upstairs, figure of somebody with the beard and so on. But prayer traditionally, that's what prayer is supposed to be about. It's about turning to God. So one way to then ask ourselves the question would be, when I pray, do I do it for the sake of God? Do I, and the question of course is, when do I pray? So when we go to services, I hate that word, right? The famous joke, right? The kid is looking at this, wall of memorial plaques of people that were in the Marines and in the Navy and in the Army, and they gave their lives for the country. And he's looking at it, and he says to the grown-up next to him, what is this? And these are people who died in the service. And the kid gets really scared and goes, is that the evening service or the morning service? So, but of course, the word services takes its name from the idea that we're supposed to be serving God by showing up and engaging in this activity. Is that the common mindset that and you don't have to be personal, you can talk about them, you can talk about, you don't have to give away your own feeling, but obviously we only have a right to talk about ourselves. Is that the sense that people have, that's what the services really are about? Josie? A lot of people have their hands up. Yeah.
Many times when I pray, it's for me. It's something I want or I desire more than it is about God.
So, okay, so interesting. But why are you praying? If you need something, go out and take care of it.
Well, it's easier said than done. Big things you can't really do yourself.
But you feel that when you're praying, you're directing a petition, you're directing an appeal,
petition,
a message to some other address, right? And saying, I need help with this. So then you're being very, very, very strict with the question, is that for God's sake or is that for my sake, right? And a question that's been asked by a lot of people, in over the history of our religious tradition. There are a lot of people who have their hands. Geraldine, what do you want to say?
For me, it's developing and increasing my relationship with God. It's not only asking for things, but it's also thanking him for things and asking for guidance, and also trying to know which way to make a decision or turn. So part of it is for me, but also thanking him and praising God as well. It's developing a relationship. And that's why, for me, going to shul and being with a minyan is so important. And when people say they don't go because it doesn't do anything for them, I'm not going like I'm going to a concert. I'm going to have a back and forth, develop a back and forth relationship in both ways.
Okay, thank you. And who else wanted to speak? A bunch of people. Sarita.
So actually in line with what Geraldine was saying, I think that we need to define what does it mean to do something for the sake of God. And I think about, going back to when Judaism, we gave sacrifices. It wasn't because God needed food, right? It was about creating that connection.
Those spare ribs weren't bad. The spare ribs weren't bad.
Well, it depends what were they made out of. But I mean, it was a sense of creating that connection, feeling gratitude, being, creating a mindfulness about what you do, and awareness. So I think, to me, that's what it means for the sake of God. It's not that, I'm doing something that'll immediately benefit, God.
So, okay, more people. Yes. Nick.
Well, I think
Jen, you're raising your hand, or you're knitting. Okay, or whatever that. What are you doing exactly? Crocheting?
Cross stitch.
Stitching. Cross stitching. Okay, yeah, Nick.
I'll take my turn after Nick.
Yes.
I think things like the Mensch Squad and IHN and the Refugee Assistance Program. I think all those things are what God would want us to do. So whether they're for the sake of heaven, I don't know, but I think so.
Well, so you're bringing up, that an important distinction. There are many, many wonderful atheists who do all of these wonderful acts of kindness and justice and advocacy and so on, and they do it because it's the right thing to do. They don't do it for the sake of heaven. In fact, they would be very insulted if you told them you're really doing it for the sake of heaven. They would say, again, no, take me at my word. I'm not doing it for the sake of heaven. I'm doing it because I care about my fellow human beings. So what Rabbi Yossi is saying is, do it for the sake of heaven. It's not so obvious that that's just taken care of that way. Jen.
Wow, I think like everyone's right. I do feel though for myself that when a service is really me being in service is actually when I'm not praying, because I can do that anywhere. You know, there is a specialness to the liturgy, but, you know, just spontaneous prayer can be anywhere. So when I feel in service is when I volunteer to Rosh Gabbai to help out Jeff, or to, you know, do something else that's actually making the service run smoother, or coming when I know there's might not be a minyan. So like I'm actually helping there to be Kaddish or something concrete like that. Then it feels like, oh, a service.
Okay. Geraldine?
When the Mishkan was being built, and the directions are written very specifically, people who had certain gift, any gift that they had, either a physical gift of something, gold or silver, but also of the talents. And we believe that God created us with those different talents. So it's to serve God in that way as well. So for some people, it might be prayer. Some people, it might be doing cross stitch. Some people, it might be, you know, being a doctor or a rabbi or a teacher. All those are gifts that we've been given to do deeds for heaven's sake.
So we got a lot of these different kinds of deeds, but what we're seeing is that it's not a given that the same deed that two different people do will be for the same motivation. Two people can do all kinds of wonderful things, and they can do the same thing. One person might do it for some other agenda that they have, including a noble agenda. And the person that's doing it for the sake of God is with a different kind of mindset. And what I'm hearing is it's not that common. It's not to be taken for granted. And that's part of the force of what Rabbi Yossi is saying is, you know, yeah, you're doing a lot of great stuff, but I think, says Rabbi Yossi, that beyond simply doing it because it's right or good, do it for God. And that's a challenge. We have a common translation. I just was dropping in yesterday in one of the JLC classes after our own davening, and they were talking about what a mitzvah is, and the standard translation that we always come to first, and I think that this is pretty accurate, got a high degree of accuracy, is we say a mitzvah is a good deed. Guess what? It's not.
It's a commandment.
It's not. It's a commandment, and it's a commandment by who? By the rabbi, by the synagogue board, by the no, right? It's a commandment by heaven. But that's really not in our immediate mindset at all. We justify doing certain things by convincing ourselves it's good. And of course, the good deeds are the ones, the low-hanging fruit is what Nick was talking about, right? Helping people in need, being there for a person in trouble, caring, and God forbid, don't think that I'm putting any of that in devaluating any of that. Of course not. Those are good things, good deeds. But is it a good deed to pray Musaf on Shabbat? Is that a good deed? I think that's beyond the common thinking that our community mostly engages in. Sarita, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think just a complication is also to remember that there have been a lot of terrible things done for the sake of God, for the sake of heaven. I mean, the Crusades, other people trying to foist their own religious beliefs on other people. You know, that's partly, we see that, excuse me, going on today in our current politics, I guess. So I think, you know, it really being careful by in terms of saying that I am doing something for the sake of God. I think you really need that there's a caution there that we have to take.
Right. So yeah, there's an aversion to that kind of language. There's a resistance to that kind of talking and that kind of mindset, because it gets us into cruelty and trouble and causes suffering in too many situations. So we run away from it, and that's part of modern life. That's what part of the definition of modernity was, this historic turn away from just taking for granted that, I can justify whatever I want according to my God, and going, wait a second, there's somebody else out there who has a different God or has no God, and this doesn't make any sense. That's part of modernity, and we are super modern, right? We are a community that's very, very saturated in modernity, and that's why this whole question, for most people, is not a question. I mean, that's what I'm pushing. For most people, this is not a concern. People don't go through their day going, did I just do that for the sake of heaven? It's not an issue. I mean, if anything, it's better not to, because you're not going to be a Taliban or an evangelical, or any of these other horrible creatures who use the God card for terrible things. Jen.
Well, it's two things. I think that most things we call mitzvot will fall under a mitzvah, like loving your neighbor as yourself or treating the stranger kindly. I mean, I think you can almost take any good deed and it will follow some mitzvot, but some mitzvah, excuse me. But
Musaf on Shabbos.
I mean, I don't know if that's actually a mitzvah from God or not. Does the God say we have to have musaf? Because we didn't have it back in the Torah times. So I'm thinking it's just, that's the extra sacrifice, right?
Prayer. It's the extra sacrifice,
Okay.
which was commanded by
All
God.
right. So then you can say, yeah, then it's a mitzvah.
I know
So
it's
that's
a mitzvah.
why.
Is it a good deed?
It's now, that's a problem I have with shul, right? Like I do feel, sure, I'm doing my own devotions and that maybe will help me be a better person. But if God wants it, I guess you can say then, there must be some good in it. Presumably God's not completely random. So there's a reason I stay till like 12:15 or whatever, back when we had the old service. So yeah, there must be something. But I had something else to say to, I guess, yeah, that's the whole thing. Like, that's what I have an issue with. If you put this in like the words of the Gita, it becomes a matter of devotion to God and, having God, Vishnu, but God really, always on your mind, etc. And that's the only way I can say that, because me cross-stitching, it's not going to a temple and it's not going to our shul. And so the only way that this could be, doing something for God is if, like, yeah, you have the divine constantly on your mind or something, or you're doing it for God's sake or somehow. But I have to twist my mind around to make that happen. And
Well, so yeah, but so that you're bringing us, we have only a couple of minutes, but I think that that's really key. And I think that that's hopefully we'll remember to come back to this if we don't finish it up with it now. Having God on your mind, think, Geraldine mentioned before, relationship, right? To create that relationship, first of all, to believe that there is such a possibility, right? Which is beyond many people's thinking as modern people. To believe that that's a possibility, that can be created, that relationship, and then think by analogy to other loving or devoted kinds of relationship that you might have, and it might not necessarily be devoted. I'll give a tricky kind of example. Caring for a very elderly parent who hasn't necessarily been the most wonderful force in your life. And many people spend tremendous energy, time, resources because they're devoted to taking care of this person, despite the fact that the love is not necessarily the big factor at all. In fact, it may not be at all. But devotion is a great word. This kind of commitment, this kind of sense of commandedness. This person's being puts me under obligation to act a certain way. So that, that sense of connection and that sense of obligation can come from some pretty heavy places, and not just from some pleasant places, not just from some feel-good places. And then the things that you do are not necessarily these premium, easily identifiable deeds of goodness, or if you're talking about God, of a religious quality. I think about little children who are devoted to some caregiver of theirs, to a teacher, to a parent, to a grandparent, to a nanny, to anybody, right? And they're off in the corner cross-stitching, and then they come over to their caregiver and go, "Oh, look what I did." And they're so happy to be able to share that with this being that they are connected to. So the relationship opens up the possibility that anything that you do can be brought into that relationship. If the relationship is real, then the simplest chit chat can be part of the relationship, and not necessarily the Musaf Amida on Shabbat, if it's part of the relationship, right? If it's with that sense of consciousness. I'm going to end it with one last little teaching. Love your neighbor as yourself. Rashi, and we say that that's the whole Torah, right? So Rashi in I forget where in the Gemara, not in his commentary on the Torah, but in his commentary on someplace in the Gemara, probably Kiddushin, I don't remember. He says, if that's the whole Torah, could be in Shabbos where the Hillel story is. If that's the whole Torah, how does that deal with Musaf on Shabbos? So the answer, love your neighbor as yourself. It just sounds like a lot of interpersonal stuff. And his answer is, your neighbor is with a capital N. God is your friend and your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. Right? Treat God the way you would want to be treated. So, that's a very expansive definition. All right, we'll come back to more stuff hopefully next time. Thank you.
Yashikar.